Welcome, U.S. history. I am going to quickly go over sets 10, 11, and 12. We left off with Martin Luther King marching on Washington, D.C., his famous speech, I Have a Dream, to support Kennedy's civil rights bill, and then Kennedy died after that, was assassinated. LBJ would get it passed. And then the next step was voting. This was a big part. This is a big deal to Martin Luther King. In prior notes, there was a civil rights bill, 57, but again, that had no meat, no power, no way to enforce it. So this was the big one. So Dr. King wanted the right to vote. So again, so here we are. LBJ is president. He's also running now as the Democratic nominee for president, kind of a re-election, vice president under JFK. And so he had to be really careful about who he supported. Remember, most of the South was Democrat. And because of this law being passed, that would be the end of the South being Democrats. Almost the entire South would switch in the 1964 election to Republican, in which they remain today. All right, so the Selma March was the march captured on television. There's a movie called Selma. I highly recommend it. It's also in just about anything about the civil rights movement. All right, so here's more about the march, March 7th, 1965. It was very successful because it was brutal. As you can see, we have a senator from South Carolina, John Lewis, was there. Look at that across the bridge. This is just crazy. Do you guys see that? Wow. Anyway, so the Voting Rights of 1965 has passed. Was it significant? Absolutely. You can see by the end of the first year, 1965, 250,000 African Americans could vote, and really changed the face of politics almost immediately. So Martin Luther King pretty much was done as the leader of the civil rights movement after 1965. We'll talk about him in just a second. So here we are, set 11. So they have the right to vote. They have equality, even though it still took a while. There was a lot of racism. And because there was a lot of racism, African Americans face problems in the city, and it's poverty. Okay, so poverty would exist all the way into the 90s in the cities. Okay, and most of the poorest sections were housed by African Americans during these times. Okay, so we have a problem with poverty. There's a new movement coming. Our notes that I'll go over tomorrow, we'll talk about Black Power, talk about Malcolm X, talk about the Black Panthers and groups like that. SNCC is going to become, originally it was an integrated student group. It's going to become entirely Black, headed by Stokely Carmichael. So we'll get to that tomorrow. But anyway, so you can see set 11 is about poverty, life in the cities, not good. We have our first riots, the Watts riots in Los Angeles, hot summer, 65. We're going to have riots in 66. We're going to have riots in 67. We're going to have riots in 68. And so the first one in Los Angeles, just because of the bad conditions of the city, started by a traffic ticket. You guys can check that out in your notes. There's the soldiers coming in. I was living in Los Angeles at the 92 riots in Los Angeles, and I left the next day after most people left, and there was nobody on the freeway leaving Los Angeles, but there was truck after truck filled with Army soldiers coming to go fight the riots in LA. So I've been there. So the Kerner report comes out, and it blames white America for because of the racism and segregation, why things are so bad between blacks and whites. And so that Kerner that comes out in 65. And the Beatles eventually do a song called Helter Skelter, talking about even a possible civil war between blacks and whites. So pretty crazy stuff going on in the 60s. And in fact, the next unit 14, will be on the 60s, one of my favorite units. And the last part is set 12. Okay, so again, Dr. Martin Luther King, his nonviolent strategy had worked up to this point, but he's not really revered anymore by Black America as the leader. Highly respected. Believe me, when he died in 1968, it was a massive heartache for Black America and America in general. So Dr. King again, Malcolm X and others will kind of take the lead here. He moved to Chicago, tried to do the same thing he did, trying to get equal rights and voting rights for African Americans, trying to make life better in the urban areas, but he failed miserably, basically, in Chicago, as you can see in set 12. All right, that's all I got today. I'll have the final notes tomorrow, the final couple sets. And again, remember, check your emails. The superintendent sent out the grading policy. Credit it's basically pass fail. I'll let you guys read it. And if you have any questions, email me. I was going to have a Zoom sometime next week. We can talk about grades. Okay, signing off.